No pressure. Thank you so much. First, I want to congratulate Julianne and her team. Julianne and her team reached out to myself and Ben Wisman, who is here, the manager of the nutrition platform, CGIAR nutrition platform. And we thought, oh gosh, how much time do we have to spend on this? And then we realized that we wanted to spend time on this. And we spent hours in talking with you, and we talked many times. And then again, after when the different iterations of the report, we had many things to feedback with. So thank you, Julianne. Thank you and your team. It's wonderful to see the report now. Thank you so much. So you asked me, what can we do with the report as the CGI? Exactly. Before I start with that, I want to give an example of how we have used, well, me and people who work with me, how we've used science generated by the CGIAR and solutions from the CGIAR to get messages and relate these to policymakers. In Bangladesh, as some of you know, I've worked many years, and I've worked with nutrition-sensitive pond polyculture. And in the villages where we've worked, many women are engaged in now, and it's now part of the agricultural sector in Bangladesh, and many ponds, many women and men use pond polyculture as part of their agricultural practices in Bangladesh. So in some villages where we had targeted women to be engaged in pond polyculture with large and small fish, we worked together with an Australian project that was in Bangladesh that was talking about communications. And they provided the women who were engaged in pond polyculture with phones and taught them how they could produce small videos. And they did so, and some of these, we got into there and said, can we have some of the videos which the women produce focused on videos that we can use for policymakers? And the women produce these videos, and part of we had the PhD student working on it, and her role was to help produce the videos. They reached to the policymakers of Bangladesh in different sectors. And then she interviewed the women, and then also interviewed the policymakers and look at the actions that came to the ground, and did a whole PhD research on this. But it was a wonderful process to see how you can have that interface of research that's being done by CGIAR and partners, getting that back to solutions on the ground, and getting that information and the practices and the experiences back to policymakers.
Thank you. And to you, Dr. Mohammed Ibrahim, I wanted to hear about how ICA facilitates the integration of scientific research into agricultural policies across the Americas. And I also wanted to hear a little bit about the challenges that you are facing that are specific to Latin America, and what kind of lessons could be drawn for here in Africa or other regions.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to participate on the report. There are many issues that align with what ICA's work has done. ICA has a repository for policies, and I've already asked the manager to post this in our site. I noticed you has addressed many of the issues. I haven't seen the report, but I think the issue of food waste is an issue that is gaining a lot of traction and discussion, and as it relates to the food systems. ICA is the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation in Agriculture that works in 34 countries, and each of the countries are members of ICA. And it's an institution that works between the interface of the research centers, research and innovation centers, and using the information, science-based information for formulation of policies, working with the ministers of agriculture. The ministers of agriculture reaches once per year, and we have regular meetings. But what ICA does is package the information, make a compelling case to the policymakers as what are the impacts using the science and information, what are the impacts of the innovation or the technologies that we use in terms of the impacts of health, impacts on food security, impacts on the environment. And that is information that many of the ministers, but also the finance ministers is looking for in terms of making decisions. You've mentioned the use of biofortified rice, or biofortified wheat or beans. There are good examples where we've shown what is the impacts on reduction of the health costs if we can look at nutritional aspects. And how do you look at the nexus between food systems, the environment, water, etc. So that's the way that we've been working on. The next meeting of the Council of Ministers is going to be in Peru, and already they have put on the agenda the discussion about livestock systems, knowing that in Latin America, livestock plays an important role in the whole sector in terms of the economies, the livelihoods, and is being discussed globally in terms of how can you reduce the footprint. And that's something I've been working with Hillary and the CGIAR centers. So what we're doing is gather information and evidence and science and how to get that into the policy. And there's going to be a declaration coming out of how to address the advancing of that. Now, what are the challenges? I think one of the main challenges are institutional fragmentation. The food systems goes across many ministries, many institutions, so we need to look at a more multi-stakeholder approach. We've been working more with our ministers of agriculture, but the environmental ministries, the decisions on water, the decisions on health, we need to have them on the table and the discussions on how you work on setting policies so that you can have policy coherence. There are good examples also where, as Ian mentioned, how many of our people are using science and evidence for making policies. I've been working in Latin America, and I can say there are many examples where policies are just being done based on without any proper use of evidence and policies that they work on. There are also examples of perverse impacts of policies. I've seen that where the decisions of made in food have resulted in more expansion of the deforestation in many of the areas. So we need to look at a more systemic approach in the policy setting that we work on. There's a weak culture of evidence-based decision-making. That something is related in the use of science and evidence. Ian mentioned the problem of turnover of the people working in the different ministries and the decision-making. We have seen in many areas they'll have the lifespan of many of the ministers alone only 6 to 8 months. So when you're working with these policymakers, who are you working with, and how can you continue to be consistent in the decision-making that we're working on? But based on my personal experience working in the region, I think we need to also talk to the parliamentarians, the people who work in the Congress. They're the ones who are making decisions over the budget, financing, and making decisions of what are the policies that they need to work on. And I think that has been very useful. For example, Costa Rica, where we have our headquarters, is a small country, but has been a champion in terms of moving the policy for climate change and integrating the agriculture sector, looking at having a decarbonized country by 2050. And the policies relating to the agriculture sector, promoting the NAMA's livestock, the low carbon economies for livestock, for coffee, for cocoa, bananas, and using the evidence and experiences that is coming out from the research from the different centers from the CGIAR to advance in terms of looking at productivity, but also looking at low emissions and in the system, but also looking at carbon, while at the same time looking at productivity and the value chains that they work on. There are also low investments in the sector. We need to make a better case for more investments. How do you link the public and private partnerships? And there's a disconnect between research agency and, I said, public. So what are the strategies we're looking at? We're looking at multilateral dialogue space where we integrate all the actors. What are the drivers of change? Today, most of the drivers of change we've seen from the agriculture sector is coming through the window for climate change, for example. The NDCs or the COP that you mentioned in biodiversity, or the food system transformations that we work on. So those drivers of change has been one that has been leading of making and formulating policies that we work on and using the science-based evidence. The experiences that we've seen in the case of how do you apply this in the context of Africa, you did mention that we need to look at the context of the countries that you're working. What are the political, socioeconomic contexts? What are the land tenure situations? How they're working on the policy for gender? And what are the barriers for transformation? I think most of the time we're making decisions without understanding what are the barriers that will come out and will help these innovation processes that we want in. So aligning with the science and local priorities, I think is very important for us. Strengthening institutions, how do you strengthen institutions and building the capacity? But also, what are the regulatory frameworks that we need to work on to make this working? Recently, the European Union has laid out a new rule now for zero deforestation, or is going to be a new rule for CBIM. So ICA has been working with the coffee growers, with the livestock producers, the beef farmers, etc. So how can you apply better policies, but also the use of sustainable intensification of the systems to produce more coffee or beef, while at the same time addressing the issues of transparency and traceability in the whole value chains that has been linked now for the zero deforestation and exportation from the Latin American region to Europe. So that's an example where ICA as an institution is playing an important role in the policy dialogue and bringing this to the table. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Thank you for those examples too. I wanted to go back to you, Dr. Lusike. And I wanted to hear about you as a leader in national research. I wanted to hear how you make sure that your research reaches the people who need to hear it the most, and maybe ways that you could work with CGIAR to do the same.
Okay, the first time I was really selfish and I focused on me, but this time I have to represent Calro. So on how we get our information out. Calro is a leader in terms of digital, using digital extension, because we don't have sufficient funding for our research. Research funding in Kenya is about 0.02%, so it's not even anywhere near the 2% stated by NAPAD. So now how do we get our information? How do we communicate our research results? So it's the digital platforms. If you go to Google Play Store, you'll see we have several mobile applications, and all of them are really smallholder, farmer friendly. And then now what we've done that will be coming out into this space very soon, we have developed a lot of YouTube movies and little clips that are 2 to 5 minutes. And then they can also be TikTok, because we're trying to attract the youth into agriculture. And then also Kenyans don't like reading at all, you know, so, but they like to watch. So now we've made all these watchable things that if you start with one, it becomes like a drug. You don't stop watching, but you're learning in the end. So yeah, so these are some of the things that we're doing. The digital agriculture is huge, and we have a big ICT team that is able to do this. So in addition to using that to communicate, of course, we use the normal papers. You know, some of us are digital, are really analog. We like reading, and you can see all my colleagues here reading papers. None of us came with some iPad. I have mine in the bag, but I had to conform to everybody. It might not be as nice, but so how do we then now get everybody? So we have those that will have hard print, the electronic ones, like the report here, will get it electronically, and then of course the videos. And then the other thing in terms of communicating, because we're looking at the policies and the challenges that we're facing, and then with these challenges, then how do we develop technologies that make sense? So at the beginning where I said that the CGIAR copied us, now I want to address that. If you
Yes,
can
I'm so
give me time. Now, let me tell you how they copied. So they began with the issues of digital agriculture in terms being used for communicating and then getting that out there. And that actually happened when we began the workshop during the launch of the project. They said the report is digital. So they copied Carol right there. And then the issues of climate adaptation and mitigation. Yeah, we've got exactly the same thing, climate resilient breeding systems where we develop certified resilient seeds and breeds. So that's complete copying. I don't know who copied whom. It was the egg that came before the chicken or the chicken before the egg. So those two align. And then the issues of early warning systems. So now you're coming into that environmental component, you know, so yeah, early warning, because we have all of these pests and diseases that are really problematic, and we need to know in advance, like the rain right now. So we have partnered with Kabi, and we've come up with a lot of these tools like Popol Armyworm, Tuta Absoluta, and then we also have a Kenya Agriculture Observatory platform where we're able to, the farmers can use it to be able to determine when it's going to rain. And actually, it's only this year that I didn't do it, but from 2021 onwards to 2023, my mom thought I was a witch doctor because I'll tell her, no, don't plant, just wait, you know, and you know, my brother is asking me, what are you looking at? So I tell my brother, you go to this and check and you see. So we kept on, then I tell my mom, okay, plant now, tomorrow it will rain, and it does. So the first time mom just said, look, the second time she said, you are a witch doctor. So now these two now conform with each other. So the issues of the early warning system, and then the issues of focus on nutrition, and the issues of food and feed safety. So nutrition, it comes with the issue of biodiversity. I always have to talk about my guava. And for you men, a guava a day will keep your prostate healthy. So the issue of biodiversity comes in, and then these nutrient-rich foods like beans that are high in zinc and iron, those are all coming, and many other crops, but the big one we're promoting a lot is beans. But when you come to the CGIAR, now there's a whole range of crops, but we're together, we're feeding into each other. And the issue here is, how do we improve the food in our school feeding programs? And that's where we find both the CGIAR and CalRO coming in to really come to ensure that our children get fed with nutritious foods, because you know, Kenya, we have to produce another Obama. We ruled America, and now we want to rule China. So, you know, the only way that's going to happen is by good food. So you can see how we're linking the biodiversity, and then whatever we do in CalRO is all about developing technologies for the smallholder farmer. So the poverty reduction and improved livelihoods, there we go. We're together, we're like twins. And then you end with navigate the future. We end with future fit research. We're twins. We're just doing the exactly same thing, trying to see how we can improve livelihoods and to see really what we can do with them, because the future of farming is here. It's here, it's right now. How do we work and partner together to ensure we're reaching the smallholder farmer, that we're including youth as agripreneurs, that we're ensuring that we're developing data, or what they call big data, that can inform policy so that the policies now make sense and make a good impact on development. I'll stop there. I can talk until tomorrow. I'm a woman. Thank you.
Thank you. So to you, Dr. Ian, I wanted to ask you about, you know, lower middle income countries are of course often on the front lines of food and nutrition insecurity, but their policy challenges are very context specific. And I wanted to hear about, from your experience, how can we ensure that these countries aren't just recipients of research, but actually driving the global science agenda?
Thanks. Yeah, I mentioned previously the need for continual dialogue and building relationships and trust between science and policymakers, including in low and middle income countries. And that dialogue can help ensure that the research priorities reflect the needs and the demand from those low and middle income countries, and based on real co-creation. And I just want to pick up on something that Mohammed said. He mentioned the need to engage with parliamentarians. I had an interesting conversation last year with a parliamentarian from Ireland, Member of Parliament from Ireland, and he chairs the scientific committee of the Interparliamentary Union. And I think there are something like 180 parliaments that are members of that union, because it's not only national parliaments, there are regional parliaments and so on. And we had an interesting conversation because he was trying to persuade parliamentarians to become more interested in science. And we're trying to persuade decision makers to become more interested in science. So we were coming at this conversation from very different perspectives, but it was an interesting conversation. And it was primarily about how does science engage with parliamentarians? So I agree entirely with you, Mohammed, on that. So I want to turn for a moment to the UN Committee on World Food Security, or the CFS. It's the foremost inclusive international and intergovernmental platform in the field of food security and nutrition. And it integrates representatives from governments, from member states, from UN agencies, from civil society, from indigenous peoples, from the financial world, research institutions, philanthropic foundations, and the private sector. And it develops and endorses policy recommendations and guidance on a very wide range of topics around food security and nutrition. And these guidelines are developed based on scientific evidence and information produced by the high-level panel of experts on food security and nutrition, of which I am currently vice chair, and Shakuntala has been a member of that panel in the past as well. So the high-level panel of experts, or HLPE, is asked by the Committee on World Food Security to produce reports on particular aspects of food security and nutrition. Some of those topics are suggested by us as members of the panel, and others come through the CFS mechanisms. But an important point is, irrespective of who suggests the topic, the CFS formally requests the high-level panel to produce reports on those topics. And it's obliged to consider our reports when we produce them. So when we set about producing a report on a particular topic, we appoint a drafting team, 8 to 10 people from across the world, from different backgrounds, disciplines, and we pay particular attention to ensure that the drafting committee includes representatives from the research world in low and middle income countries. The process we go through is open, it's transparent. There is a consultation, an open consultation on the draft scope of the report. So the scope can then be modified on the basis of that consultation. There's another consultation on an early draft, so we get feedback from many stakeholders. And finally, the reports are peer reviewed. Our reports produce a series of recommendations. They need to be clear, practical, and communicated in a way that policymakers and decision makers can understand. We want the decision makers to see themselves in our reports. And we don't have just have a series of general recommendations, but each recommendation comes with who the target audience or the stakeholder group is. It might be national governments, it might be UN agencies, it might be multilateral financial institutions or NGOs or the private sector or whoever. And we're careful not just to suggest what needs to be done, but how it can be done. That might be based on case studies, for example, similar to the report we've just launched here. And this really helps policymakers with practical examples of perhaps what has worked, but also importantly, perhaps what has not worked as well. So the CFS, the Committee on World Food Security, then uses our reports as the basis for developing policy guidelines for its member states and other stakeholders. But we also know that governments and other organizations use the information in our reports directly without waiting for it to go through the policy conversion process at the CFS. So some of the reports we've produced recently include strengthening urban and peri-urban food systems, which we launched last year, reducing inequalities in food security and nutrition, data collection and analysis tools for food security and nutrition, and promoting youth engagement and employment in agriculture and food systems. We're currently in the process developing a report on building resilience in food systems, and we're about to start the process of producing a report on indigenous knowledge in food systems. So our reports are global. But we pay special attention to issues in low and middle countries. And as I said, we ensure that the drafting teams have representation from low and middle income countries. But we also have a mandate to draw to the attention of the Committee on Food Security critical issues that we think are important, but outside the scope of the 4-year work plan that we get from the CFS. We have some flexibility in flagging issues that are important. We've done that on several occasions over the last few years. And finally, I want to say that I think the CGIAR has a really important part to play in the Committee on World Food Security and in the high-level panel of experts. The CGIAR has a seat on the advisory committee of the CFS, and CGIAR staff have historically been involved in the high-level panel as members of the steering committee, as members of drafting teams of reports, and as peer reviewers. However, I do think that the involvement of the CGIAR in the CFS and HLP could be more systematic than it is at the moment, and I've just started that discussion with CGIAR management, including Ismahan, because I think the Committee on World Food Security can be a very important conduit through which research from the CGIAR can really influence the policy process. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And back to you, Dr. Shakuntala. You are an aquatic foods champion, especially in the way that they can improve nutrition outcomes. So I want to hear about what kind of lessons from your work decision makers could take and in terms of how they can approach food systems transformation and specifically with regards to improving nutrition outcomes.
Thank you so much for that. I just want to say, with respect to aquatic food systems, yes, it's always good to have a champion and to have someone push the work forward. So Ian talked about the many reports that the HLP does, and after the next report on on indigenous knowledge, then the next report of the HLP is going to be on aquatic food systems. So that's one way that we could use the science from the CGIAR to reach to many audiences. To answer your question, I'd like to give an example of how all the research that we have in that we do in CGIAR, and I would use as an example the research that I have done with partners and with researchers in CGIAR on aquatic food systems, and how we have tried to move that to the population at large, not just the policymakers, but to the population at large, and to have influence on this new knowledge, influencing, for example, improvements in nutrition and health of the population at large. And I have my friend Gina Kennedy sitting there, so she knows all about this work because it's something that we have worked with a lot. So one of the ways that we have, one of the entry points, I'm giving this as an example, is all countries, I would say all, or most countries, have national food-based dietary guidelines. And they use national food-based dietary guidelines as recommendations to the population at large, and also to specific population groups as to how you can translate the science into what actions can be taken by different populations group to improve nutrition and health. So, for example, if I give the example from Denmark, Denmark has very strong food-based dietary guidelines, which takes into consideration diverse foods and also including aquatic foods. But Denmark has gone one step further. Some other countries have, like Mexico, that they have also increased sustainability in the recommendations, sustainability of food production, also aspects of waste are also taken in the national food-based dietary guidelines moving forward. So this is this is an example that is extremely powerful because it's using the science to move to actions by people. And to go even further, in Denmark, for example, it's not just, words on a piece of it's not just a report. The food-based diet, the national food-based dietary guidelines are not just a report. Every month, the office in which food-based dietary guidelines are housed, every month they produce information and pamphlets and recommendations to the population at large as to how they can take into consideration seasonality and the foods that are in season in that month in order to meet the dietary guidelines, which takes into consideration, as I said, meeting diversity of foods, but also meeting the nutrient recommendations and also taking into consideration sustainability of production.
Thank you. And back to you, Dr. Mohammed, before we open the floor up for questions. So hopefully we have a couple of minutes to do that so you guys can start thinking of questions for these panelists. But I wanted to ask you about scaling. And so, we have so many successful pilots, and going beyond the pilot is always kind of the bigger puzzle. So I wanted to hear from your perspective, what's the key to bridging that gap, especially in complex food systems?
Thank you. I think scaling is an issue where there's been a lot of challenges. Today we had several discussions around the theme for scaling, and we need to look at what are the barriers and what are the challenges to be working on this. ICA as an institution now has been working on a new generation of policies, but not only policies, what is the institutional framework and reforms that we need to really enable these conditions to have scaling. I think there are many issues that we need to look at. I still think financing is a major issue for scaling. We've been talking to many of the banks in Latin America, the CAF, the Central American Bank for Central America. And many of the issues they mentioned about de-risking the finance for the agriculture sector maintains an issue. So I think that's something we need to work on. How do you de-risk the finance, and where ICA is providing blended innovative areas of providing finance for the agriculture sector as an example of how you can work with the policymakers. Improving infrastructure, for example, now using of digital technologies, tools that you need to do, and testing the regulatory framework. These are important areas that we need to have in terms of enabling conditions and having a supporting ecosystem that you work on. What are the incubators, the accelerators, providing technical assistance. I still think that the extension services need to be more modern extension services in advance with the innovation and technology, which is moving in a positive direction, so that we can have a more cascading effect in terms of the impacts of the outreach of the farmers that you're working on. There has been many discussions about public-private partnerships, but our experience has been most of the time the compliance from the public sector in terms of how do you operate the public-private partnership has been where we have found the bottlenecks in terms of how do you operate that. But ICA as an institution recently has been working on the concept of living soils, which Professor Ratan Lal, who you know is a World Food Prize winner, is now championing this and to promote this whole concept about low carbon agriculture in the whole Latin America, using the experiences of the Brazilian ABC, the low carbon agriculture system, working with the private sector, whereas Bayer, which is also PepsiCo, with all these different private sector organizations, and working with the policymakers to set the policies for enable the transformation and use of the different technologies and innovations that have been developed for the different sectors. For example, livestock, coffee, banana, rice, for example, where there's a lot of emissions. We're using information from the wet and dry information that you presented as one of the case studies. Already we have seen some of the countries like Suriname and Guyana, where I am from, producing, using this information now for transforming the sector. My colleague mentioned about the school feeding program. I think there's a lot we can learn from Brazil, in which the Brazilian government has taken a decision on a policy to purchase close to 40% of all the food produced from family farming. And what the ICA's institution is working, how can you work in more integration of agro-biodiversity, looking at unutilized species with high value, nutritional value, and how do you have a short circuit value chain for linking this and improving the school feeding programs. And many of the countries now are looking at these policies that we work on. So here you can see where public policy can be driving the change and where you need the support and technical assistance. How do you help the farmers to produce in a stable and a more quality during the year, so you can have a supply that is very stable, but also helping the farmers to looking at risks beyond climate change, but the supply chains, for example, in fertilizers and pesticides or whatever has been increasing, and how do you help them to work in mitigating these actions that we're working on. Building institution and human capital, we have been providing training. We have innovation labs. We are strengthening the Center for Excellence that are working and providing the youth, engaging youth with a gender focus of how can you promote these business incubators in these areas. So I think those are some examples that we're working on, and I can use this example.
Thank you. So I want to open it up for questions. We only have about 5 minutes left, but that is enough time for a couple of questions. So anyone? Yes, we have one in the back, one over here. Yes, thanks so much for your help.
Yeah, thank you very much. Charlotte Hebebrand from IFPRI, the International Food Policy Research Institute. Big congratulations to the CGIAR for releasing this report. At IFPRI, policymaking and engaging with policymakers is part of our daily business, but we're delighted to see this cross CGIAR emphasis on the importance of engaging with policymakers. IFPRI was formed in 1975 because it was felt that the CGIAR needed to have more emphasis on policy. And our work focuses on enabling environments for scaling innovations, but also on policy innovations, right? So we talked about social protection regimes, school meals, all of those things involve policy innovations. I want to second Dr. Ian's point about political economy, hugely important, right? We can do the best science and the best communications, but the reality is there are lots of factors that policymakers have to take into consideration. And again, IFPRI does have some modeling and some work to help understand the stakeholder interests, special interests, and look at political economy work. So hugely important. I want to say something about the CGIAR. What are the implications for what are the next steps, right? So I think we have to be careful when we say that policymakers don't want to hear scientific research. I mean, I think scientists should always focus on research, and they should do the best research that they possibly can. Some scientists are very talented communicators and can convey their findings in an accessible way, but others are not, and we shouldn't force them to do that. So I think it's great if the CGIAR can really also prioritize communications. I work on communications at IFPRI, so I just want to make a plea for there are great policy communicators who can take scientific findings and make them accessible. And then I just have a question about the next steps, right? What is the future of this report, and how does it tie in with the new research portfolio that has just been launched? And maybe just two suggestions. We have one science program that is looking at policy innovations, so that might be a good place to think about a future report. Another one is digital, I forget what the name of it is, but the digital science program. And I think we could have a real interesting proposition here using AI to synthesize the body of research that is coming from the CG as well as other research organizations and tailor it to specific countries. And we have done a little bit of work on that in Kenya based on IFPRI and research findings from our Kenyan research partners. So those are just some ideas I think that we could consider, because AI really, I think, provides a lot of support in this domain. Thanks.
Thank you. And if you have any questions at the panel, for the panel specifically, would you like the microphone? Yeah.
I just want to see that it was working with IFPRI We're working on the 2030 initiative on nutrient smart, the new generation of policies also, and they're a strong partner that we've been working on looking at policies.
Thank you so much. And thanks very much to our esteemed panelists. It was wonderful hearing about your experience and hearing your expertise and your enthusiasm for the report as well. And we're going to have some closing remarks. And then after that, there will be a reception where everyone can talk more and ask each other even more questions. So we'll hand it over now. Thank you again.
Thank you. I'd like to express my thanks to our panel members and our beautiful panel facilitator. Thank you. I would like to invite Des Nadu, CGIAR Integrated Partnership Board member, to come and provide some closing remarks. There's a lot of pressure. He's in between us and some snacks. But we'd love to hear your reflections on the session today. And at the end of the session, we will have to move to a different location. So just prepare yourselves mentally for a transition potentially in the rain. I'll hand it over to you. Oh, no, be careful. It's quite rickety.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. And I'm not going to stand between you and a cocktail. Just a few things to share. The first thing, quite informally, is I was wondering when I came in on Monday why I was given a Caro lanyard. Well, everyone had the fancy colors one. And they say you learn something at every session. So the learning here, Lusike, is that I can acknowledge Caro for the pioneering work you've done inside these domains and the fire that it has caught across the system so that we can be where we are today. So thank you. And on a more personal note, and the men of my age in the room will appreciate this. So the go away is a guava a day keeps the urologist away. This is pretty good. I just want to offer a few points in closing and some responses to some of the things that have been said. The first point is that the environment in which we're operating today has a set of challenges that make the notion of a polycrisis absolutely undeniable. We have a climate crisis, a climate catastrophe, regardless of a little White House talking about it differently somewhere else. This is a reality for all of us. We are in a geopolitical crisis in the world and on the brink of a global recession. And then we have the ongoing challenge all around the world with the triple conundrum of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. And in this context, our ability to use the best science, and I would add technology and innovation, to inform decision-making at all levels of the system is absolutely paramount. I also think it's fairly easy for anyone to see that agriculture has a major role in lifting us out of these compounding and cascading polycrises. The second point I want to make is that we also have to be candid as a community of practice. That in the agriculture sector and its partners, we continue to try and solve 21st century problems with 20th century technology and 19th century operating rules. It just does not work. We have to catch up. And then the third thing to add is this issue about this chasm between science and society. That on the one side, you have scientists, and all of you are in this boat. You hear about the problem and you say, but we have a solution for that. We, in fact, worked it out years ago, and why aren't folk using it? And on the other side of the chasm, you have society that says, well, you haven't told us about this. At least you haven't told us about this in the way we understand it. We are not being serviced by science. And so this initiative around bridging that gap across that chasm is absolutely fundamental. And I want to reflect on two things, perhaps. One is what Ian said about how decision makers want to see things. In my dark past, I spent about 10 years as a Deputy Director General in the government, and I wrote more cabinet memos than I'm prepared to admit publicly. But I can tell you this much. I don't know about the 23, but I know about the format of the 16 sections. And always the science and argument was there. But there were two things that fell short on the science argument. The first thing is, well, before the two things, let me say this much, that all of the decision makers acknowledged the science argument and they were curious about it. But the two places that did not give them sufficient confidence to use it is one, it almost never had a cost benefit argument, ever. This is a problem. It's a problem for people who are making decisions that need that argument. And the second is that the risk analysis, if it was there at all, was never complete. So I think these are all lessons about how we try and engage this and move this thing forward in a very rational way. Then maybe the last point to make, because I don't want to keep you away from a cocktail. Oh, there's something else I should acknowledge. It rained when you spoke. I'm assuming it's about the showers of blessing that you finally have a coalition and you're going to have a government. And your government's going to put its bit in around right tracking us in the global political space. No pressure. Our friend from Malmo likes that. I like the name of your association, by the way. So maybe the thing to close on is this, is that I think there was a good reason, Julian, to launch the report at the beginning, because the thing that we have to launch now is this ambassadorial community for the community of practice that we need. I mean, let's be clear about this. We have to be the people that organize for this to take fire in a very real way. And we have to be sincere to the notion of co-creating the solutions. And this is about more than the science advisory institutions that exist. So if we don't take this out, and I'm talking about the folk in the room and the folk that are online, then we will fall short of what our mandate really is. And remember that the demand pool that will come from the decision makers at all levels of the system will only enrich the science and the technology and the innovation that we need. So congratulations to the team. Congratulations to all of you for the co-creation. And let's see where we can get with this as quickly as possible, because we genuinely need to succeed. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those thoughtful words. What I would like to do now before we run off is ask all of the speakers, so don't sit back down, Des, ask all the speakers to come up and the team members to come up and get a photo with our report props here. And then we're actually moving, we're on the move. So Esther, is she in the room? She might be outside. She's our team leader. She will help us to move at some stage. Esther? She's probably guarding the space outside. So come up to the front, speakers, and we'll get a group photo together. Yes, please, please. Anyone that was on the panel or provided remarks, please come up to the front. Thank you. Would you take some of our reports, our prop reports? Thank you very much. Got a few more. Thank you. Different. They're a little bit, these are a bit skinny. You can have a skinny version.
Just full of great ideas.
There we go.
Yeah. Join us for the
So can I get all the champions that are here this week that have been providing advice on the report to come up and get a group photo? Thank you. And great, thank you. Yes, thank you. They're props, they're not real. Yeah. Here we go. Come up to the front. So can I get all the champions to come and join us in this group here?